Muted. There we go. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Rock Solid News. It is Tuesday, September 26th, and we got a great one for you this evening. Before we get to the main event, as usual, we've got a quick introduction video, minute long, and it's getting more and more relevant as the COVID season comes back and fall boosters come back. So enjoy the little clip here, and we'll be back in about a minute.
So, the high school drama teacher over here accuses others of liking the sounds of their own voices.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was a high school teacher before getting into politics, and I'm having a little trouble remembering what exactly the job that the Leader of the Opposition had before getting into politics.
Yes, and he left right in the middle of the semester, and I'm having trouble remembering why.
The small fringe minority who are holding unacceptable views do not represent the views of Canadians whose beds are filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated. The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people. It's never too late to do the right thing. We'll be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine.
I'd like to welcome the fake news media,
and the ideology in order to push particular agendas, and I think some of those agendas, unfortunately, pretty hardcore, pretty extreme. The power of misinformation, because so much, of what we hear coming from these protesters, from a scientific perspective, just isn't true. And
can you state categorically? You are fake news,
sir.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to our viewers on Facebook and our freshly unbanned YouTube channel. And of course, as always, welcome to our Rumble viewers, whom I will have to check in with on my phone because they don't come through StreamYard. As you guys know, there was a Million March for Children that happened last week. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank everybody who participated, parents and otherwise. It was a largely successful event through most of the nation with some minor hiccups, we'll call them, especially out of BC, it seems. But otherwise, it was a very successful event, and just wanted to take a quick moment to thank anybody who participated in any way they could. Your support is duly needed, and I guess it needs to keep going. And we'll leave it at that. So tonight's topic, the Speaker of the House resigns, Road of Resigns. Many were calling for resignations. I think many wanted liberal resignations in the form of Trudeau, Freeland, stuff like that. Even NDP resignations like Jagmeet Singh and whatever. They're not going to get that. I don't suspect any of those people will ever resign until they're voted out. And even then, who knows? But instead, you're getting the Speaker of the House resigning. And seemingly, at least in the Twitter sphere, it seems to be that the small C conservatives and the big C conservatives together are saying, great, you should have resigned. You did the right thing. And I don't know if they're ready to move on or not. But we need to get into this because the Speaker of all people being the fall boy for this, being the person thrown under the bus for this disgraceful blunder. I mean, we can get into the nuances of the division that this gentleman fought for and the like, and that's a discussion for a different time. With all those nuances aside, this was a disgraceful blunder on behalf of the Prime Minister and his governing party. And the Speaker being the downfall or the fall boy, is it seems great to those who don't really care for parliamentary procedure or how government actually runs, especially on a day-to-day basis, and that's kind of important. Somebody on Rumble just chimed in, "We want the truth." Well, we're about to search deeply for that. Excuse me. So the topic of Rhoda resigning, and now we're getting into, well, why the speaker? Well, it's apparent that they've stated that Rhoda should have been aware and slipped in his duties and all this kind of stuff. Um, or that he didn't invent it, invited by the Liberal Party to speak. But right now, we're going to take a quick look at a video, 10 to 13 seconds, I believe it is, of the speaker in the House at the moment in question, and pay very close attention to his eyes, the pause, his eyebrows. The man is clearly surprised at what he's reading. So let's take a quick look here.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
Now, I'm not certain if that came through, so I do have one more way that I can play that just to make sure people see it. So very quickly, 10 to 13 seconds, quick look at your screen here.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
So you see what I mean? Who fought for Ukrainian independence. And then he stops and he looks and he says, against the Russians. Because the Russians were our ally in World War II. So fighting against the Russians, for anybody who understands just the general structure of World War II, allies versus axis, if you were fighting against the Russians, you were not an ally. And the speaker very clearly realizes this in real time.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
Against the Russians, and you can see the pause, you can see the eyebrows lift, you can see as he's looking down against the Russians, because he registers. Now, let me ask you, the Liberal Party knows exactly who he is. I mean, the governing House leader, Karina Gould, has apparently Holocaust survivors in her family. So she's well aware of the Second World War and the implications of what it would mean to fight against the Russians. And now the narrative seems to be that nobody met with this man. Nobody knew who he was. They kind of just got invited somehow, and it was all the speaker's fault. Well, it turns out that the Prime Minister and Karina herself, along with Freeland, met with him. There's pictures to prove it before Parliament. So they did know. And now you got to look at the NDP and the Conservative and the Bloc, because the problem with what occurred with the standing ovation is that all parties took part. All parties. 338 members stood up and applauded for this man after being told he fought against the Russians. And the division he was in, the SS Waffen, was very much a Nazi-led division. So, you know, nuances aside, and there are nuances, believe me, and we can do an episode discussing them. But nuances aside, the bigger picture of inviting a man who fought against the Russians in a Nazi division, and then to announce to your parliament who the man is and whom he fought for and against, and then to have all members of parliament stand up and applaud this man as a standing ovation is an utter disgrace. It's an insult to your intelligence as a Canadian, because you know better. And I don't suspect the average Canadian would applaud to somebody who fought against the Russians in World War II. Instinctively, as soon as I hear those words, I know if you fought against the Allies, then you're on the Axis. If you're presenting me with information about somebody who fought against the Allies, immediately I'm like, wait, so he's our enemy? That should be a reaction that a elected member of parliament, a representative of the people, a lawmaker as such, these people, it is incumbent upon these people to have the basic working understanding of how World War II occurred, especially, and I'll stress this, especially if the term Nazi is going to be used as a label for your political opponents. Because that's the utter irony. Karina Gould also stressed that she didn't want this blunder to be politicized. Trudeau even called it Russian propaganda. I'm not sure how his own actions can be Russian propaganda unless he himself is working for the Russians. Karina Gould doesn't want it to be politicized. Well, there's a problem with that because last year when Canadian citizens took to the streets and convoyed, they were described as Nazis and they were egged on by liberal supporters, members, the Prime Minister, and then, the hateful types online. They were egged on to use the term Nazi, Nazi sympathizer. There always happened to be one Nazi flag that would show up at every main event long enough for somebody to take a picture of it, and then the news took a hold of it. And it was Nazi sympathizers, Nazi adjacent, or just straight up Nazis, neo-Nazis sometimes. Okay? So you spent over a year labeling your political opponents and their supporters as Nazis, which is a very damning label to accrue. As someone who's had that label thrown at me, hurled at me several times over many years, I can tell you that it affects the way people look at you socially, especially if you're in a smaller town. It's a very damning label. Nobody, generally speaking, in their right mind would want to be labeled a Nazi. So to have the government essentially sanction this sort of hate speech against its citizens during the Freedom Convoy, and basically every time anybody opposes the governing Liberal Party, they're essentially labeled Nazi, Nazi adjacent, white supremacist, some form of Nazi type. So with that in mind, it's almost precious. It's almost the chef's kiss irony to now have the Liberal Party bringing in somebody who fought in an SS Waffen division in World War II, a Nazi-led division against Allied forces, and have them celebrated in Parliament on the public hazard, and have all 338 members of Parliament stand and applaud this man. And there's absolutely no excuses for applauding for that person. Anybody who hears the words fought against the Russians in World War II should know absolutely without a doubt. And in case you're questioning that, look at the Speaker of the House, the man who got thrown under the bus and resigned. Look at his reaction in real time as he finds out the House is about to honor someone who fought against the Russians in World War II.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
See those eyebrows? Hear that pause? That's a man who's finding out in real time and understands the implications of the words he's reading, as anybody should, especially somebody who's been entrusted and elected to be a representative of the people. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Speaker of the House has resigned. The man you just saw in video has resigned. He's apparently taking full responsibility. Okay, so the man who absolutely, without a doubt, had no idea what was happening. clearly had no idea, and found out in real time, as you saw in video, and we'll periodically play it for those newcomers who pop in. This man had no idea. Whereas the governing Liberal Party, the PMO, these people invited, through their own actions, words and actions, invited this man to be part of Parliament, to be celebrated. There was some sort of vetting process. Lord knows who or whom is responsible for vetting invited guests to the House, but I would hope that that person right there would be caught up in this whole, resign type movement. So for everybody along the way with whom lies actual responsibility, these people get to walk away scot-free because the speaker has been thrown under the bus. He's taking full responsibility and is resigning as the Speaker of the House, effective, I think it was today. This seems to be being applauded. The Liberals are going to applaud it because it's their move to throw somebody under the bus and move on. But it's seemingly being applauded by Conservative and NDP types online. And I'd like to suggest and submit to you, the audience, and to Canada as a whole, that that's not a good thing. That, yes, I understand the Speaker of the House gets appointed from the governing side of the party. I understand that, okay? Parliamentary procedure is one of the few things in life I actually have a decent grasp on. And that's why I felt compelled to do this episode, because, yes, the Speaker comes from the governing side of the party. I get that. However, the Speaker of the House is the one person entrusted with maintaining decorum, honesty, respect, and freedom of members during Parliament. And they're the only person entrusted with the authority to actually maintain that, not just, in a symbolic sense, but also in a sense of repercussions. So the Speaker has a very defined role. And if you go on ourcommons.ca, you can find a section called The Speaker. And this is what it looks like. And you can scroll down. You can see up here, ourcommons.ca. And you can scroll through and have yourself a fine read. This is stuff I've been reading for the last decade because this is the kind of stuff that interests me. However, it struck me as the Speaker of the House was resigning due to a prime ministerial blunder that this wasn't a good thing. Now, here's the time for a disclaimer. I don't vote in so much that I've unregistered as a potential voter. So I'm not here to promote any political party or anything. I'm here to promote never participating in it. However, if you are a Canadian who participates in voting and thusly must assume that there is democracy within Canada, and fairness and representation from the people you vote for, and therefore some sort of accountability, okay? Because they're the presumptions that come with a democracy, right? This open transparency, this accountability, this fairness and transparency of the body of government we're discussing. So if you are one of those people, it's time to ask yourself, well, what is the role of the Speaker? Yes, they come from the governing side of the party, the governing side of the House, you know what I mean? So very briefly, the role of the Speaker as defined by the government, ourcommons.ca, is to ensure orderly flow of business. The House of Commons preserves parliamentary rules, written and unwritten. The Speaker's duty to interpret these rules impartially to maintain order, defend the rights of and privileges of members, including the right to freedom of speech. and the speaker's actions must be impartial. Consequently, the speaker never participates in the debate and only votes to break a tie. And the speaker guides the House of Commons through deliberations by calling the items on the agenda, but also feels the need to interject for urgent attention. The speaker may be asked to schedule an emergency debate. There's plenty of things they can do. They can also force members to answer a question. And this was actually used in previous parliamentary sessions. You have to go back to the 80s and the 90s to properly see it. But there once was a time where if somebody asked the governing side of the House a question, and that governing side stood up and just said, Mr. Speaker, we're committed to blah, 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 and didn't answer the question and just sat back down, the speaker would interject and force the member to stand back up and put an answer on record that was at least relevant to the question. So right now, if a member decides to stand up and say, Mr. Speaker, we've sent another X amount of millions to Ukraine, and Canadian families are struggling back home. What does the Prime Minister have to say to the parents and families that are struggling and concerned that we're spending money in Ukraine when it should be spent in Canada? Justin Trudeau can literally stand up and say, Mr. Speaker, I woke up this morning, I brushed my teeth, had my coffee, and the first thing I wanted to do was read Harry Potter. So I sat down and read Harry Potter, and here I am in the House of Commons dedicated to answering your questions, and I look forward to that. And he can sit down. He's allowed to do that. It doesn't look great, but the speaker actually has the authority to force that member to give an answer that's at least relevant to the question, in that he has to use words used in the question, descriptors used in the question in his response. The speaker also has the power to hold members in contempt of parliament and have them removed and have them censured that way. These are things that the speaker can actually do, and they're the only person in the House with that. I mean, there's technically like the sergeant at arms that may or may not debatably have that sort of power. But realistically speaking, the Speaker of the House, as defined on ourcommons.ca, and in this very, very brief, I mean, it'll take you 5 minutes to read. It's, a dozen paragraphs, and that's the bottom. That's the very last one. You will find out for yourself, if you go to take a read on that in this parliamentary system that exists here, I got some great comments coming in. We'll display those. In the parliamentary system that exists, through the BNA Act, which sets up Parliament and the procedures of how it's going to operate, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that kind of tags along with it, through these documents, the Speaker has the actual power to maintain some sort of decorum in Parliament. And it's not their role to vet guests who are going to be invited from these parties. If anything, it would be the parties themselves, and then there would be some sort of committee within Parliament, or the parties themselves would set up some sort of committee to vet them. But it's not up to the Speaker of the House, nor is it up to really the Speaker's office. And people are even saying, the Speaker's secretaries let him down and the like, because they're the ones who write his speaking notes, and someone should have picked that up, obviously. And I don't disagree with that, but I still don't see how it's good in any way, shape, or form to blame the Speaker and have the Speaker bite the bullet, get thrown under the bus, however you want to talk about it, and have us move on. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's conducive to at least what people expect from a democracy. And at this point, we're the laughing stock. Internationally, Poland is considering extraditing the man from Canada, or applying for extradition. to take the man back to Canada and have him tried for war crimes. So you'll see how that goes. India obviously is just lambasting us because, well, that brings me to another point. If we're doing something as absolutely bollocks and as absolutely insulting to our intelligence as blaming the Speaker of the House and having your Andrew Coyne, Bruce MacArthur, CBC types promoting that as like a good thing and like, yeah, the Speaker took responsibility and now we can move on as a country and, yada, yada, yada. That's not a good thing. And the fact that we're doing that suggests a distraction. Many of you will know now when all eyes and ears are on one thing, it's generally to distract from another thing. And we just brought up what could be possibly being distracted from with India. India is also calling out Canada again for nonsensical diplomatic bullshit. First, it was, the promotion of the Khalistani terrorists in Canada, the allowing of that, and then accusing the Indian government of being involved in killing a Khalistani terrorist on Canadian soil, and then expelling Indian diplomats and having India return the favor. Aside from all that, the mainstream media in India right now is suggesting that Trudeau's disgraced trip to India had a lot more negative implications than we're finding out here through our own media. So we all know that Trudeau had a terrible visit. He was ignored. There was a lot of summits and meetings that occurred without his presence. And many photo ops that you saw where he was kind of given the cold shoulder. We all know that, and we all kind of expected that. I don't think what we expected was his plane, his prime ministerial plane, to be delayed trying to leave India coming home. And some of you heard Twitter rumors, but Indian media now is actually stating on the air that there's credible evidence that cocaine or some other drug was found on Trudeau's plane by drug-sniffing dogs. And that's why his plane was delayed. The other interesting thing about that is they're suggesting that he was actually high on these drugs during his meeting, and that might have been why other world leaders were ignoring him, because it was noticeable. He was left out of certain little cliquey talks that he should have or would have otherwise been part of had he not been under the influence of some sort of stimulating drug that was apparently obvious to other people. But I don't think it's necessarily the drug thing, because I don't know how much credibility there is to that aspect of it. However, the distraction from India doesn't have to be about drugs. He's blowing this nonsense up with the Khalistan support here in Canada, and the way he's promoting the Indian government's involvement in the killing of a Khalistani terrorist here, the way even Jagmeet Singh, out of all people, Jagmeet Singh is standing shoulder to shoulder with Trudeau during this nonsense, suggests to you that it should be an election year, I guess. That's the only way I can put it, based on his aggressive Khalistani support and his anti-Modi nonsensical BS, and how that backfired. Consider how much that backfired when he did that. So when we're talking about when we're talking about Rhoda now resigning and this whole Nazi in Parliament, it's possible that it's distracting it from India. And we got some new viewers rolling in on Rumble as well as here in Facebook land. So I'm just going to play this 13-second clip for you again. This is the Canadian Speaker of the House, or should I say former, reading from his script that he's given in real time, finding out he's about to honor a Nazi in Parliament, and see how easy it is for him to realize the words he's saying and what they mean. Yet, 338 members of parliament stood up and gave this man a round of applause. Take a look and tell me what you think. Look for the pause and the eyebrows up as he's saying fought against the Russians in World War II.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
Who fought for Ukrainian independence against the Russians. And he has to kind of stop. It registers his eyebrows. Facially, he realizes exactly what he's just said. And we're supposed to believe now that this is the man with whom is responsible for allowing a celebrated Nazi openly in Parliament, given a standing ovation by 338 members of Parliament. Now, opposition parties, I don't know how, if they get briefed on this kind of thing. So those members were likely going directly from the words that were said to them. But I ask you again, the Liberals have no excuse. They invited this man, the PMO and the Liberal Party invited this man. The Liberals have no excuse. If they didn't tell their own members, that's on them. But their members should have and are likely would have been made aware of this guest, their invitation, and their intended speech and celebration. But I ask you, new members in Rumble's viewers are starting to pop in. Rumble, I ask you this. Look at this. This is 13 seconds. Ask yourself, if you heard the words fought against the Russians in World War II, would you or would you not realize that that means they were our enemy?
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians.
You can see the pause, the eyebrows, the reaction. It's he gets it. The minute he says the words out loud, he understands what he's saying. And I submit to you, because I still do have this faith in the Canadian people, despite some of my personal posts on Facebook, we'll say. I still do have a certain hope for Canadians. And I do suspect that the majority of Canadians, if you told them this man standing next to me fought in World War II against the Russians, I suspect most Canadians would recognize that as having fought against us, as in the Allies. And maybe I'm wrong about that. And, feel free to tell me by all means. But I suspect that. Now, take that a step further. You're an elected representative representing either the government or the official opposition, or at the very least, you're representing the members, the citizens of your riding on the federal level for the federal government. You're being paid a base salary of $105,000 a year. If you're told to stand up and applaud a man who fought in World War II against the Russians, you should recognize what that means, and you should have the decency to not stand up and to not applaud this man. So I have no interest in giving anybody amnesty over this. That's it for me on that one. I think this is possibly a distraction from India. I'm not necessarily sold on the whole drug aspect of it with the whole rumors of cocaine, although it is going mainstream in India. I don't know how much credibility that gives it. I'm not privy to the inner and outer workings of how the Indian mainstream media work. I'm not sure. If they're anything like our country, it means it's not credible at all. However, we'll see. I suspect it has a lot more to do with geopolitical implications of wanting to get the public away from the previous blunder of last week of basically supporting Khalistan and accusing India of killing a Khalistani on Canadian soil, which was the biggest rookie political move you could ever make, especially as India drifts away from the West and into the loving arms of the BRICS alliance. And we'll leave it at that. So I do thank you guys for listening. It's been a fantastic one. It is Tuesday. It is September 26th. This has been another evening edition of Rock Solid News. You people, you stay sovereign, okay?